February 13th. You're perfectly content. Then the calendar flips and your brain starts whispering lies. Everyone has someone. You're the only one alone. Something must be wrong. 24 hours earlier, none of this mattered. But now, watching couples flood your feed with choreographed affection, you feel something shift. Not loneliness. Something darker. The creeping suspicion that maybe you're failing at being human. If you've ever felt genuinely annoyed by Valentine's Day, not because you're bitter, but because the entire performance feels psychologically manipulative, stay with me. What you're experiencing isn't cynicism, it's pattern recognition. And what I'm about to break down is how your nervous system responds to manufactured social pressure, and why resisting it might be the healthiest thing you can do. Here's what nobody admits. Hating Valentine's Day doesn't make you a misanthrope. It makes you someone whose brain refuses to participate in collective delusion. The holiday operates on psychological manipulation so subtle most people don't recognize they're being controlled. And the ones who do, they get labeled bitter, lonely, damaged, which is how social control works. Pathologize resistance, normalize compliance. Today we're dismantling the psychology behind Valentine's Day resistance, why February 14th triggers anxiety that has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with behavioral conditioning, and why people who opt out might have healthier attachment styles than those performing love for an audience. Because here's what nobody's saying. Valentine's Day isn't a celebration, it's a social experiment in conformity. The mechanism behind this pressure has a name, the bandwagon effect. This is where people adopt behaviors simply because they perceive everyone else is doing it. Your brain is hardwired for social survival, constantly scanning for norms. When February 14th arrives, the visual landscape transforms. Flowers on every corner, heart-shaped everything. Couples performing affection with theatrical precision. Your brain interprets this saturation as evidence of a norm you're violating. Not participating doesn't feel like choice. It feels like exclusion, like standing outside a party everyone got invited to, except the party is fabricated and the invitation is marketing. But your amygdala doesn't distinguish between real rejection and manufactured pressure. It just knows, everyone is doing something I'm not. Threat detected. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing, and this is what the greeting card industry will never tell you. There's something more insidious in your cognitive processing. Psychologists call it the availability heuristic, where your brain estimates frequency based on how easily examples come to mind. On Valentine's Day, you're bombarded with coupled bliss. Every ad, every storefront, every post, your brain calculates, if I'm seeing this much evidence, it must be statistically dominant. Except it's not. A massive percentage of people are single on Valentine's Day, and even more are in relationships that don't resemble the curated performances flooding your perception. You're not surrounded by happy couples. You're surrounded by strategic visibility, and your brain is mistaking advertising for reality. Then there's the family component. Behavioral scientists talk about the social clock, an invisible timeline of milestones cultures use to measure success. Valentine's Day becomes the annual reminder you're supposedly behind schedule. Your parents didn't invent this pressure, they're transmitting it. When they ask about dating on February 14th, they're not expressing concern for happiness, they're expressing anxiety about your social compliance. And this is where behavior gets actually concerning. Because around mid-January, something predictable happens. Dating app activity spikes dramatically. Psychologists call this panic dating, where people seek relationships not because they desire connection, but to eliminate an aversive stimulus. That stimulus, the anticipated judgment of being single on Valentine's Day. You're not choosing a partner, you're choosing a shield, and that shield is a human being who deserves better than being your emotional armor. Research from Pew reveals nearly half of American adults are currently single. That's not a minority, that's half the population. But on February 14th, relying solely on visual input, you'd estimate maybe 5% are unpartnered. Valentine's Day doesn't reflect reality. It amplifies a specific narrative so loudly your brain mistakes volume for truth. You're part of a massive, invisible majority that's been gaslit into believing they're the outlier. Now let's talk about people who do participate, specifically those in struggling relationships using Valentine's Day as a psychological reset. Couples with unresolved conflicts will use this single day to administer intermittent reinforcement. One grand gesture, one expensive dinner, one public declaration. Intermittent reinforcement is the most powerful conditioning mechanism in psychology. It's why slot machines are addictive. In relationships, I can endure months of neglect because once yearly I get evidence they care. But that evidence is performative, not indicative. It's scheduled, not spontaneous. Your brain registers the reward and convinces you to stay in a pattern, slowly eroding your sense of self. Studies show people report being perfectly content February 13th, but experience significant satisfaction drops on the 14th. Same life, same circumstances, different date, suddenly everything feels inadequate. Social psychologist Leon Festinger identified this as social comparison theory. Valentine's Day is a global comparison event with artificially inflated benchmarks. Your actual life hasn't changed, but your perceived value plummeted because you're measuring yourself against curated performances designed to trigger this response. Your brain experiences upward social comparison, where you compare your behind-the-scenes reality to everyone's edited broadcast. Before this starts sounding like Valentine's Day is purely evil, let's address the shadow. Not everyone who hates this holiday operates from healthy autonomy. Some use resistance as defense against vulnerability. They've convinced themselves rejecting the holiday means they're immune to needing connection, when really, they're terrified of wanting it and not receiving it. So here's the diagnostic question. Do you resist because you've examined the psychology and chosen not to participate in manufactured pressure? Or are you resisting because vulnerability feels dangerous, past rejection stings, it's easier to call it stupid than admit you might want connection but fear unworthiness? Conscious autonomy versus avoidant coping. Until you're honest about which, your resistance might just be self-protection masquerading as enlightenment. But for those who genuinely resist from clarity, not fear, there's something powerful happening. You're demonstrating what researchers call high self-efficacy, the belief you can manage your emotional state without external validation. You don't need a calendar to tell you when to feel loved. You've internalized what most spend decades learning. Your value isn't dependent on someone else's performance of affection. Evolutionary psychologists argue this independence is more advanced psychologically. Throughout history, coupling was about survival. But in modern society where survival needs are met independently, pressure to couple is almost entirely social, not biological. High autonomy people aren't rejecting connection, they're rejecting coercion. They're saying, I'll participate in intimacy when it's genuine, not when marketing tells me it's time. There's a concept called JOMO, joy of missing out, the opposite of FOMO. On Valentine's Day, people practicing JOMO aren't sitting home feeling sorry. They're experiencing genuine satisfaction in opting out. This isn't passive isolation, it's active preference. They've calculated that participating, the crowded restaurants, inflated prices, performative gestures, exceeds the benefit. That's not loneliness, that's resource optimization. Let's be honest. The people who benefit most from Valentine's Day aren't those in love. They're those selling the idea that love requires specific products, gestures, performances on designated dates. This holiday is a masterclass in behavioral conditioning. Create scarcity around affection, attach it to a calendar, monetize the anxiety. When you resist, when you refuse to participate, society gets uncomfortable. Your resistance reveals the performance for what it is. If love is genuine, it shouldn't require a specific date. Your refusal doesn't make you cynical, it makes you honest. And honesty is always threatening to systems built on illusion. So what does healthy resistance look like? Quiet confidence knowing your worth isn't contingent on having someone to celebrate with on one arbitrary February day. Understanding solitude isn't a problem to solve. Recognizing the pressure isn't from your actual life, it's from a manufactured narrative you have every right to reject. Hating Valentine's Day doesn't signal bitterness. Refusing to perform affection on command doesn't indicate emotional unavailability. Preferring to spend February 14th doing literally anything else doesn't mean loneliness. It means you've figured out that authenticity matters more than conformity. Peace matters more than performance. Genuine connection can't be scheduled, purchased, or posted for validation. Tell me, are you team Valentine's Day or team literally any other day? Do you feel the pressure or have you built immunity? Drop it in the comments. Maybe the most radical thing we can do is admit we're not interested in performing love for an algorithm. If this felt uncomfortably accurate, subscribe. We're just getting started. We'll be investigating more about human logic and its quirks week by week.